We want to thank you all for being here tonight. This is our first event for military families for free expression. So, you guys are very, very special to us. Our hope is to educate you guys and to bring this community together and to start building connections. This is just the start of it. And we're thrilled and we're excited for tonight. A little information about military families for free expression. MFFE for in short. But I'm Tori, and together we are a whole group of intelligent and strong and engaged and activists and advocates and military spouses. And the team includes Libby, Kelly W, and Kelly A, Amy, Kate, Summer, and Rebecca. This coalition was born like that. And ever since then, we've been trying to get out resources. We have an Instagram, we have a one pager that Libby's going to put in the chat for you to know more about our purpose and our vision and why you are a part of that purpose and you are a part of that vision. And one person, one book club, one conversation at a time, we're going to make sure military families are protected and that books don't get banned and that information doesn't get censored. Now I'm going to have Kelly go over our agenda for tonight.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all so much for joining us in the midst of our all of our busy lives, because I know we all have them. I was complaining about mine, but please, cry me a river, right? So thank you all for being here. For first and foremost, for the purpose for this evening. Why are we here? What are we doing? We wanted to bring this community together. And again, we don't think of this as like our little team and what we're trying to accomplish. It's like literally the collective community because you're here because you care about free expression for military families and ensuring that those freedoms that our loved ones or ourselves potentially have fought so dearly for are protected and preserved. And it's not yet another sacrifice that we have the opportunity to make on behalf of this country. So we want to bring community together. We want to give you some starting points on how to build connections in your own local community. You're going to hear this multiple times throughout tonight's event. The grassroots efforts are really, really, really important. So though most of us want to come out and do big, sweeping, bold national things, it's often more effective to just have those conversations with your friends, your neighbors, your installation leaders, right? All the way up the chain. So we want to talk about those opportunities to do that, to get some volunteer outreach in. We're going to share some resources and we're going to give you some concrete calls to action at the end of the session tonight and kind of sprinkled throughout. The first conversation that I want to share with you guys, I am really excited to share a tiny bit of background. As we mentioned, we're here at Fort Bragg together, Tori and I, but my husband is getting out of the military next year, and we've decided to stay in Fayetteville. So we are putting down some serious roots, and what those roots are going to look like for me are actually going to look like an independent bookstore. It was kind of a merging of a couple of passions of mine and also just something that I feel really strongly about in a concrete way that I can try to help build community physically here in Fayetteville around things like access to literature and awesome conversations. I don't know, you can probably even see I went to a conference this week and have stacks of books that I'm trying to go through and read and curate for our shop. So one of the resources that I found to be really helpful was the American Booksellers Association. So it's an industry association, but they have an entire division dedicated to protecting freedom of expression, free speech, access to books, particularly as pertains to booksellers. So I've made connections with that group, and I want to introduce you all to their associate director, Philomena Polifron. Excuse me if I got that wrong, Philomena. You'll forgive me. And she has some awesome context for us. So we want to start right off at the top about what are book bans, where do they come from, and what can we do about it. So you guys enjoy this conversation. Hey everyone, we are so excited to introduce you to one of our amazing friends doing awesome work in the field of book banning and raising awareness and fighting particularly for booksellers. So I'm excited to introduce you all now to Philomena.
Yeah, absolutely, Kelly. Thank you so much. I'm Philomena Polifron. I'm the Associate Director of American Booksellers for Free Expression. We're part of ABA. ABA, just for context, represents over 3,000 bookstore locations around the country, coast to coast. And be on the coast, right? So there's so many great bookstores, and so many of them are just doing incredible work in their communities, including military family communities. So we're the Free Expression Initiative of ABA, and so that can mean a lot of things. I think about it in terms of education, just letting people, booksellers and their customers, know what can be done about book bans, where you can lean in, how you can make a difference in your area, but also trying to impact legislation to get out ahead of book bans before they start, but also pushing back on some really terrifying censorship legislation that, some of the stuff that people don't hear about because it doesn't move at all is really, really scary. Um, but then also litigation. We're involved in lawsuits in Texas and Arkansas to keep book ban laws off the books. We have preliminary injunctions in both states, and that means that bookstores don't have to worry about someone coming in and starting trouble based on what they have on their shelves. That said, people being people, they do come in and start trouble. And so I also do a ton of direct support for bookstores who are experiencing harassment or threats or other forms of intimidation.
Yeah, I think of the bookstores as kind of like the last bastion. And actually, you just led a session about being on the front lines of the
Yeah.
book banning fight because we, being private, small businesses, we are able to curate what we want. However, that doesn't come without cost, often depending on what location you're in. So, yeah.
Yeah, people think about it in terms of libraries and educators, and that's absolutely true, right? I mean, those are the front of the front lines, but increasingly we've seen it spill over into bookstores in some really worrying ways, just in
Yeah.
terms of people, coming in and thinking because they have a right to challenge a book in their library that they do in their bookstore. It's like, hey, I have great news for us, terrible news for you.
Yeah.
These are private businesses. You don't get to come in and tell us what to do. And so
Yeah.
that's why I think we can actually be more resilient in some places where libraries and schools are potentially more subject to pressure.
Absolutely. And on that note, as you know, we're talking about the book bans happening in Department of Defense, in our education, facilities and institutions, which can happen sort of sweepingly just by the nature of our institution. We are run by the DoD. We don't really have much of a say in it.
Yeah.
So we're here today just making some noise about it, raising the importance of it. But I think we should back up even more. So
Mhm.
Philomena, could you give us just a brief sort of overview of the history of book bans? How long has this been going on? What maybe is a book ban? How can we start to wrap our heads around thinking about it in a productive way?
Yeah, yeah. So to keep it brief, I'll stick to the 20th century because we could go all the way back to ancient Greece. We could go back to the founding of the United States. But in the 20th century, most people think about the McCarthy era as one of the places. And so this is middle of the century, 50s, kind of creeping into the 60s a little bit. But the McCarthy era is a time where Joseph McCarthy, a senator, is starting to interrogate people because of their perceived communist sympathies. And that involved authors being pressured because of the political ideas that they're putting out there. And it also just involved these incredible kind of interrogations about people about their personal lives, which is really something that we've started to see come up again in terms of how librarians and educators are treated. Not so far in any kind of Senate committees, but just on the local level, school boards, library boards, etc. So jumping forward from the McCarthy era, in the 70s and 80s, we start to see something that looks even closer to what we've been experiencing in the past 5 or so years. The 70s and 80s, I think of it as the moral majority era. The moral majority was this super conservative group that was, banning books that had any kind of sexual content, including things like, Judy Blume's "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret," which is just giving young people information about their bodies, right? And information about puberty, which everyone goes through, right? This should not be a controversial issue, right? But they were targeting those as somehow sexualizing children or pornography. Same arguments that are used now. And actually, if you really dig into it, some of the same groups funding that era as are funding it now. So this is a really, really long battle that just keeps coming up. And the moment that we're in now kind of begins in 2020, which I think surprises a lot of people because, that's the beginning of the Biden administration and so forth. But actually, what really kicks it off is resistance to COVID restrictions in schools, because Moms for Liberty actually comes out of, and I do actually think of this as the Moms for Liberty era. It has gone well beyond Moms for Liberty, especially as their brand becomes increasingly toxic. But they start a trend in terms of organizing people into a frenzy at school board meetings and trying to use pressure and intimidation to shut people down and shut books down. But they got their start kind of coalescing around people who are pushing back against mask mandates in schools. And somehow that resistance to COVID restrictions just kind of morphs gradually into this larger movement about everything they perceive to be wrong with public schools.
Yeah.
And very quickly, they would become most famous for school book bans.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how from there, that kicks off the avalanche that gets us into where we are now.
Yeah, I specifically remember there were protests here, or well, I'm not here. I'm not in Fayetteville right now, but in
Mhm.
Fayetteville, where our kids go to the public schools in the community, and there were absolutely protests about masks and return to school and all of that. And I mean, that's great. But then when you peel back the cover a little bit, you're like, wait, who's behind this? Are you guys even local? Like, you're not in our communities. It's a very organized effort, highly orchestrated with cohesive talking points. I mean, it is, y'all, it's a movement.
Yeah, and those tactics have
Yeah.
carried over directly, right? I mean, the tactics that they used in terms of bringing people in, having people who are kind of making the circuit of places that they think they can pressure,
Hmm.
and also using a lot of disinformation, right? Because
Right.
they're misrepresenting what these books are and what the purpose of them is.
Yeah.
In the same way that I would connect that to the disinformation around masks and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, so that I think that feels like it leads us into our next talking point. It's always like, what can we do? So tell
yeah.
us a little bit about the ongoing like national efforts that are already happening. So let's not reinvent the wheel, you guys. I know everybody's excited and eager to get out there and do something. But we have strategically tried to bring to you, all listeners, organizations who are fighting this fight, who have awesome guidance and ways to plug in. So Philomena, can you give us some guidance as like our nomadic selves that we are? Relocating all of the time, give us some encouragement and also some places to look to plug in and get involved with the fight that's already going on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are so many great organizations that are working nationally, but also grassroots organizations really are where the power is. And that's why I was so happy, Kelly, to when you told me about the military families that are organizing in their own communities and for their own communities, because that's where the power is, right? So wherever you are, right, if you can start paying attention to school boards, start paying attention to library boards, to town council meetings, to your state board of education, see who is showing up there, right? Talk to the people who are on your side and say, like, hey, is there a way that I can get involved? Do you know of anybody who's doing this work? Because a lot of times there are good reasons to kind of keep it on the down low, right? Because then it makes it harder for you to target. So talk to people in your area, show up at your school board meeting and speak and let it go from there. But in terms of nationally, it really depends. I mean, what your position is. There are, you know, ABFE represents independent bookstores, right? And what we part of our mission is to try to help independent bookstores be that touch point for their communities where you can go and talk to people about books and also the freedom to read. So during Banned Books Week, which is October 5th to 11th, stop by your local indie bookstore, talk to people. That can potentially be a really, really great nexus for figuring out who's active in your area. But if you're connected to your library in some way, look for Friends of the Library organizations, which are frequently nonprofit organizations that are just dedicated to supporting the local library and its well-being. Talk to the American Library Association, talk to every library, right? Getting on the every library mailing list is a really, really great way to keep up with information, as well as AbbVie's mailing list, which you can find at bookweb.org/advocacy. I'm sending out email blasts all the time when there's legislation that you can potentially testify against. Especially parent testimony is so important for or against legislation dealing with education. Um, so all of these organizations, Authors Against Book Bans is doing incredible work. They have some really great resources. So, these are all our allies. I'm working with them all the time. Some days I'll be in like 3 different meetings with people from some combination of those organizations.
Yeah.
But just figure out who's doing the work locally, and then whatever your stance in relation to books is, whether you're in the business, not in the business, there are people who have resources for you.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. So I want to go back to something you just said about parent testimony and the
Yeah.
importance of that and how powerful that is. Can you take that a step farther as my last question for you, Philomena?
Yeah.
Tell us, military families, why our voice matters in this conversation.
I mean, the military families are so important because they are one of the few groups of people whose voices, I think, do or should cut across bipartisan lines. I mean, it's no secret. We're extremely divided country at the moment, but support for veterans, support for military families, I really think is one of those things that is a shared value, right? And so I think, speaking of all of the sacrifices that you all make as families and as individuals, and then if people can see that you're being repaid for that sacrifice with having more restrictive school systems and more restrictive library resources than the rest of the country, I think the injustice of that is going to resonate with people. So your voices are so important. And when I made reference to testifying for or against legislation, I'm not talking about national legislation. Right now, there's so much possibility to make a difference in your state legislature. So most of your states, it's very different, but for the most part, January, February, that's when you need to start paying attention. Get on some mailing lists of some of the organizations that I mentioned before, ABFEs, every libraries. Get on some of those mailing lists so that you hear about the legislation when it happens, because honestly, people most frequently hear about legislation after it goes into effect, and that's too late to make a difference, right? I mean, you can always try to repeal it, but that's a lot harder than stopping it from passing in the first place. So if you get on those mailing lists, then you can figure out how to show up to your state house, how to show up to a committee meeting and just say, listen, I read this bill. You might not understand how this is going to hurt military families, but it will.
Yeah.
And if you can make that case,
Yep.
then it's going to
Yep.
be powerful.
Yeah, you guys. So I am plugged in, obviously, to the mailing list that Philomena is referencing, and have already had opportunities in North Carolina to send representatives. I mean, this is not stuff I'm tracking, you guys. Like, we're
Yeah.
busy. There's so much else happening. But I have plugged in where I know is important. And I knew that if I got this email, like, hey, here's some action you can take, I was like, yep, sign me up. And actually got some notes back from one of our local, like, state congressional representative wrote me back and explained some things and also told me, yes, I'm supporting, I'm with you. We're in agreement, so, but now he knows that I'm here to be a voice if needed. Right. So it's just making those connections. It's providing support, pushing back if you disagree, right? All of the things are just incredibly important. And when you tag on there, we are an active duty military family currently serving and sacrificing in these ways. They are, I think, a little hopefully more prone to listen. So thank you
Yeah,
for that
and it can be
encouragement.
quick. It
Yeah.
can be 5 minutes. We
Yep.
make it as easy as possible,
It
right?
is. It's a button.
Yeah. So
Feels like cheating. It's not.
yeah, you can tell as much of your story as you have time to, or you can just say, hey, I don't like this.
That's enough. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, for just adding a little more context to our cause and understanding. One last time, tell folks where they can most easily connect with you and AbbVie.
Yeah, so probably the easiest way, if you have Instagram, follow us on Instagram at ABFE Free Expression, ABFE Free Expression, or you can go to bookweb.org/advocacy and sign up for our mailing list there, and you'll get updates about legislation and so forth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Philomena. Thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank
Seriously.
you, and thank you to all the military families who are tuning into this, I mean, the sacrifices that you already do, that you already make, are so inspiring. And the fact that you are being repaid in this really horrific way is devastating, actually. Thank you so much. And thanks to you and to all the families who are tuning in for your sacrifices and for your organizing.
Thank you. Okay, you guys, apologies for the bad audio visual on there, but we were just talking in a side chat. We could listen to Philomena talk all day about resources and the work that she's doing. So hopefully you got something great out of that. I also wanted to just, we're being a little modest. I'm a bookseller after all. Philomena has a book. It's Abfi's book, but it's this great little guide called the ABA's Right to Read Handbook. It's a fantastic resource. I like literally keep it at my desk all the time and have talking points to be able to shout out at people often when I hear the ridiculous claims about books. One quick thing that I also wanted to segue into our next conversation with is our Uncensor My Summer challenge that we've launched this summer. So our little group decided to get feisty and have an answer to a certain Second Ladies challenge, reading challenge this summer. And we thought it might be fun for military families, military kiddos specifically, to contribute and participate in the summer reading challenge put out by the White House, but with a little twist, right? So we're encouraging, and we've put out a couple of lists of suggested books that have been banned and challenged to include, as we talked about, Judy Blume's Greatest. Read that book, put it on the challenge, submit it, and maybe provide some feedback on why this book is important to you, why this book, or seeing yourself reflected in this book that has been challenged by the DoD education, facilities. I always say this wrong. The DoD schools, DoDEA schools. There we go. Easier. Why that hurts you as a military family member or as a military child. On that note, Libby's dropped a link for you, so check that out. It's called Uncensor My Summer. We just love it. On that note, I am so excited to introduce you all now to Vicky. Vicky, I'm not even gonna try your last name, hun. Vicky's joining us as someone who has been literally in the fight, you guys. So Vicky's a former DoDEA librarian. So we've got some fresh perspective. She's also a military spouse. Did I see you say Navy? Navy spouse representing? Awesome.
Yep.
So Vicky, we want to just get a little context from you. Tell us about what you've been experiencing lately, and what we can take away from it and what we can do with that knowledge.
All right. I love seeing all my fellow glasses wearers, but I had to take mine off. I can see you better. Hi. Yes, I just finished being a high school librarian in DoDEA. By the way, it's really hard to follow Philomena because I loved every minute of that video. Everything she said was like gold. So I'm going to try with just like a personal story. So I have been a librarian on and off. As you know, being a military spouse, it's not always possible to get the job you want, but I've mostly been an elementary school librarian on and off for 25 years now. But my last job was in Stuttgart, Germany at a high school, and I absolutely loved it. Was having a great time until all these executive orders came down. It was about the first week in February. I'm not sure. I hope I'm not like repeating stuff you guys all know, but this was super personal and hit us all like a ton of bricks. And I don't know if that happened for everybody. So around February 6th, it was towards the end of the day, we got all this news that we had already heard you can't use pronouns in your emails, preferred pronouns in your emails. That was like old news at that point. But suddenly, all in one day, we heard there can no longer be a pride club. There can't be a feminist club. We can't have gender neutral bathrooms. You cannot use preferred names for kids. Kids cannot graduate with their preferred names. They cannot be published in the yearbook with preferred names. And then there was going to be this book banning. And so this was all just suddenly like one day. And we were, how do we respond? And so guidance came within about a day about which books. And it was interesting the way it was done. We were given the two pertinent executive orders. I only have the number for one of them, EO 14168, which is called Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism. And the other one is, I don't know the number, but it's Ending Radical Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling. And so they said we were to read those two executive orders. So if you haven't already and you want to be upset, I suggest you read them. And then we were supposed to take sort of like key words, key concepts from those two executive orders and go through our library catalog and figure out which books would run afoul of those two executive orders. this led to months and months of nobody really knowing what they were doing because everybody kind of interprets things differently. There was no list. Everybody's asking us for the list, all this stuff. And I do want to pause and say that the day, February 6th, I went home that night and I was all spun up. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a plan. I didn't want to ban any books, but I knew that if I didn't, I would be fired and replaced. And then what? Because I was hoping that even if I had to ban books, I could still be an ally for kids. But if I was replaced, maybe the next person wouldn't be. Anyway, I didn't have a plan. And the next day I get to school, and this is a high school. So we generally check out between 10 or 15 books a day, which is not a lot. But the next morning, suddenly kids were coming in and checking out all these books. And by the end of the day, we had checked out 300 books. By the end of 1 week, we had 800 books checked out. These kids are amazing. And so they all wanted to like protect these books. Because I mean, of course, what it boiled down to was that the first EO I mentioned essentially meant any book that has a trans character or mentions the word transgender or gender dysphoria, and it has to be banned. And so, of course, we have trans kids at our school. All of their friends were upset. And so they just came in and said, which books? And I couldn't tell them, but I would kind of. So the kids were great. Sorry, that was a little tangent, but they were just fantastic. Meanwhile, we also had to pull anything that ran afoul of the ending radicalized indoctrination in K-12 schooling, which is something about apparently racism doesn't exist and white supremacy and white privilege don't exist. So any books that we had that claimed otherwise had to be banned as well. In the meantime, they're telling us to take these books and they're being reviewed. But what that meant was they were removed from view in our online catalog. They were removed from physical sight into a back room. They literally could not be seen by anybody. And so somehow I think they weren't calling this book banning, but I call it book banning at any opportunity I can, because the minute you take a book out of circulation, out of access, it is banned. So beginning in February, I don't know how many books, because nobody was able to talk about it, were banned. Eventually, time moves on. I did submit a list of maybe 12 books that I thought, should be banned. And I was later told that there were 160 books in my library that should be banned. And so I put them all back on the shelf before I left. Now, I was in the very comfortable position as a military spouse. Well, unfortunately, I was leaving. I didn't want to leave, but you know how that goes. But I was in the comfortable position of knowing I was leaving. So I put all the books back on the shelf before I left. But I assume they will be removed again. Finally, just this summer, I think it was just like a month ago, the ACLU was able to get and publish a list of 600 titles. So if nobody's seen that yet, or if anybody has not seen that yet, the ACLU, it's been published in a couple articles, 600 titles. So if any DoDEA school anywhere in the world has any of those 600 titles, they will now be removed. And again, they're still being considered as under review. We asked many, many, many times, what does that mean? What's next? What happens next? And nobody would tell us. Nobody could tell us. You have to assume the next step is that they're going to be removed or destroyed completely or something. We don't know. As far as I know, nobody knows. Again, I no longer work for them. I'm now working in Maryland, which is it's a freedom to read state. So fantastic.
Yeah.
I did want to also mention, because I harped on this as well, the minute this all happened, I pointed out to anybody who would listen that DoDEA has, as long as I've worked for them, has always had a regulation on the books. It's DoDEA 2992.01. This is the Challenged Materials Review Committee. And this is a DoDEA regulation that says if anybody says, hey, I don't know about this book being in elementary school or high school, whatever, there's a whole committee that meets, there's a whole process, there's forms, there's steps, there's this and that. And I said, are any of these books going through the material? Because I said, I've got my committee. We're ready. Like, let's go. We'll meet. We'll talk about all these books. And they said, no. So none of these 600 titles will ever go through the stated DoDEA regulation because they are this executive order thing. So yeah, that's particularly galling.
Vicky, first of all, you're the hero we need, putting those books back on the shelves and secretly pointing to the
Easy
babies
for
where the
me,
books are. And thank God for the babies, right? Like, what did
right?
Kelly say? The kids might really be okay. Yeah, I agree
Mhm.
completely. And the kids that stepped out and did the walkout in Germany, I mean, it's just been inspiring to watch. And they're not stupid. Like, they know what this leads to because why? Because they're readers. Like,
And
so they're tracking.
and like I loved everything Philomena said, and like the fact that um yeah, military families are the ones that are sort of suffering the most. I think I knew this maybe in the back of my head, but it never affected me. But we lived on base, and you're not allowed to protest on military bases. And again, maybe everybody knew that, or I knew that, but didn't think about it. But until Pete Hegseth came and visited us 3 days after his confirmation, and everybody wanted to protest but could not. And people
Mm,
who kind of did. I mean, the MPs rolled up, IDs were taken, like all this stuff. Like people were interviewed, and I don't think anything ever did come of it. But that's another way, like you forget, oh wow, we're military families, but we do have some restrictions on some of our
yeah.
freedoms. So
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on a couple of key things that I just want to raise back up to everyone here. What is the definition of a book ban? That's important. And you just nailed it. It's removing access to what students,
mhm.
particularly in this case, previously had free access to. And why did they have access to it? Let's back up that another level too. There are already like systems in place to ensure that books have content that's appropriate, that it's age appropriate for the child that's trying to check out the book. There are committees that exist to review books that, they're questionable or maybe they're just, they
Mhm.
need a little more insight. So the problem with, like when we first convened as military families for free expression, we're like, okay, but what are we going to do? What are we actually mad about? Well, we're mad because it's just the sweeping order that just
Absolutely.
happened. There's no transparency. You've nailed that too, and
Absolutely.
definitely helped us, illustrate that. But then there's no clear process, and the process that exists subverts what the process should be to
Mhm.
begin with. So it's just there's no there it feels like there's nothing to do. So the best thing that we can do is like bang our pots and pans and make some noise about it and talk about how unjust it is and how it infringes not only on our personal liberties, but as our freedoms as military families. So, yeah, did you have more to add to that?
Well said. No, I
Or,
wanted to thank whoever complimented my earrings, but this is where we're at. Like these are my subtle trans flag earrings that I would wear to school because
right.
you can say, oh, but they're just books, and that's where we're at. Like all rainbows had to
Yeah,
come down, all Black History Month had to come down, all this stuff. And so you're trying to find ways to still exist and show support and be a safe space for kids without actually being able to. So
being
that
able
was another
to.
way things were like very different.
Gosh. Well, let me, on behalf of the entire group here, say thank you to everything that you've
You
been doing. Thank you for being here and helping us understand what's actually happening
absolutely.
instead of us, trying to conjecture and hearsay, amidst ourselves. This is really important, and we're committed to continuing to, make noise about it and do what we can. So, any
Thank you,
parting
Kelly.
words on what we should be, can be doing in addition to, everything we've already said?
Again, I'm Philomena, I think said it really well. I'm even considering, I mean, we literally just moved here last month, but I'm like, should I run for school board? Like, or at
Yeah.
least go to the meetings that somebody else said, like, I gotta be involved. Although, as I said, Maryland is what I say, freedom
Mm,
to read state. But
hmm
this was also Maryland, Montgomery County Schools is where the recent Supreme Court decision originated from about how parents can now have their kids be like, I can't remember what the wording is, but anyway, they can be removed from any teachings of
mm,
anything.
like opt out
You know what I'm
policies.
talking about, though? The
I,
recent Supreme Court that originated here. So while this might be a
yep.
free to read state, it's also the same place that this Supreme Court decision came out of.
Yeah,
So
Charlotte's on it. Charlotte, we got you up next.
okay, great. Oh, good. All right.
Great. Yeah.
I'll be
And
quiet.
honestly, to end on that note though, I do want to say like we talk a lot about the scary stuff that's happening and we can also raise up and celebrate the fact that there are several states in the country that have put in place protections for freedom to read, right to read, right? So in the same way we're fighting the fights, we're also trying to get out ahead of it and enshrining those rights in state constitutions. So get involved in whatever way you can, you guys. Someone asked a question about what legislate, which representatives do we need to be talking to? I'm going to say, I don't know if this is the right thing to say, but I'm going to say we have the ability to reach out to both our home of record where we're registered to vote, maybe, and also where our kids are going to school or where we live or where we pay taxes. I think your voice is valid in either of those arenas. So feel free to pipe up wherever is most helpful. So, Vicki, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being
You're
here.
welcome. Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks. Okay. Tori, where you at? I seen you writing notes this whole
I
time, girl.
I'm like, I could listen to Vicky and Philomena talk all night. Like listening to Vicky share that story reminded me of how powerful storytelling is and why we're all here. And that's how you pass narrative and struggle and victory. That's how you pass that on. And, wanting to mute voices and control the narrative is not what we want. That's not the kind of world I want my kids to grow up in. And Philomena talked about like the importance of this is why we have to, even if our voices are shaking, lift up our voices. And that's our hope with this community that no one feels alone to run for school board and do it scared, but do it because you want to fight against the censorship. It's so important. And we are going to be, I was supposed to put this in the beginning and I didn't. So I'm going to do a short commercial break here. We are going to put a survey in the comments because again, this community is here to serve you guys. We want to know what you want our events to look like. What's important to you? How can we help you? How can we continue to build this up so that military families for free expression just only grows more powerful and more effective in our communities? Another thing Kelly Philomena said that I just love was she was like, we have to pay attention to state legislation. Like that is powerful. I am a community organizer for Red, Wine, and Blue, and our whole ever the moment Trump won, our motto has been when they go low, we go local. Like we have so much power on the local level. So I know it can be intimidating, but there's apps like Five Calls. I always say, don't be scared to ask a friend, like, hey, what is going on? Who do I vote for? How do I get, who, I need to get to this legislator. How do I do that? Like, don't be afraid to ask because that's where our power is. Now we're going to kind of segue into the impact on military families that book banning has specifically on us. And I think the number one thing is just, you're restricting access and
Mhm.
resources and diverse perspectives to families who are already in places where the government just told them to move, right? So
Right.
I already don't have that much control of where we live and the schools that we get to choose from. And now, even on posts, you are going to be restricting knowledge and stories. And to me, that's the most terrifying a terrifying world to live in is when the stories and the knowledge is taken away and put in a closet, and then to Vicky's point, no transparency on what's going to happen after that. Right now
Right.
you're just gone.
Yeah. Yeah, and gone. And to Vicky's point, also, like the kids were watching this happen and they knew exactly what was being targeted and who was being targeted. So not only do our babies, and I'm saying babies, I have a 15-year-old, she's still my baby, but not only do our babies need to see themselves represented in literature, they want to see it because they're encountering it in their lives anyway. They have friends that represent different types of people and ways of being, and they want to understand that world and be more empathetic to that world and be a better friend and all of the things. And books are a really precious, amazing way to experience that and to step into that world. Not only that, we're raising our babies specifically to be little globetrotters. I mean, they're all over the place. They encounter different cultures and different people, like almost as their job. So, like, anyway, just to say, like, those types of representations and those types of stories really, really matter. So, not only do they lose access to it, they're being told, we don't want you to have access to it. They're paying more attention to the message than they are the impact, right? The
Right.
intention more the impact because they're like, wait, so what's wrong with that book with I mean, y'all, Julianne Moore's Freckle-Faced Strawberry. She's a little, it's a storybook, children's book about a little redheaded girl who has freckles and she feels different. And, it's her little like, maybe I'm special after all kind of a book and story. So what does that tell children who feel different? They don't
Yeah,
want there to be what does different mean? What does different look like? We don't want that in our library. That's not appropriate. They're just
right.
erasing entire whole personalities and people and ways of being. And the kids are catching on to that.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure
Yeah,
they still feel seen and valued.
and I think what's so devastating about that is the kids are so much more inclusive than we ever were at
Yeah.
their age, right?
Yeah.
And here we are, adults, the generation that's supposed to be leading them. We're trying to water that down. And there, you're right. What is different? Well, if we're celebrating everyone, if there's representation of everyone, then there is no ill, that's weird or that's different. There's just celebration of it. And
Yeah.
there's now I know empathy because now I'm educated on it and there's nothing to fear. And I think that when they see adults wanting to water that down, that speaks loud. So you're right, Kelly. The kids are listening and the kids are
Yeah.
watching, and we're gonna have to answer for the type of world we're leaving behind. I mean, I think about the kids who do have two moms or the kids who do have two dads or little kid who is Muslim, and we're just banning these books and showing that kid your story, your narrative, that doesn't matter. That's not the right one. We're going to
Yeah.
replace it with the right one, and you just need to go in the corner. That's devastating. You're
Yeah.
leaving behind again the power of storytelling, the
Yeah.
power of I see myself in books. I mean, it wasn't until I didn't grow up seeing Black children celebrated in books. Thank God my children grew up seeing Black children celebrated, but we're going backwards in so many
Yeah.
ways. And
Yeah.
it's devastating.
Yeah, there's also a conversation to be had around we look at the higher education institutions, right? So the big stink over the book bans really that kind of landed most of this on the map was what was happening at the Naval Academy.
Mhm.
These are our future warfighters. I think I'm preaching to the choir on this one. You guys, I'm sure are all listening and in agreement. But how exactly are we expecting our future leaders in our military services to be able to handle conflict, to be able to think critically about socioeconomic differences and in different cultures that they'll be, experiencing throughout whatever is in our future, right? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever to be restricting materials in that way. So, in a way where it was all about war fighting, right? And lethality, but in a way, I don't see how that's possible when we're just kind of like literally dumbing down what it is that's being taught. So that feels really important. And then also, just the curriculum being changed in the same vein. So this isn't just library access to certain things, but AP psychology books in high schools overseas being, or, any in DoDEA schools here being taken off of shelves. So we're not going to learn modern day psychology any longer. Like our children will be at a deficit
Yeah.
because they're learning in a high school. They don't get to take the AP psychology in high school because they go to a military school. How are they going to be competitive with their civilian counterparts? Just there's so many things.
And and how is it going to line up with the world? Okay, so you're going to get rid of all the books, and
Yeah.
the books are going to look um, super bland, but that
Hmm.
doesn't line that doesn't line up with the world that our kids see when they
Right.
turn to their right or turn to their left. Our world is diverse. The military world is so diverse.
Yeah.
And so, like, you're not fooling anyone. Like, you are
Yeah.
trying to control this narrative of a world that doesn't exist. Meanwhile, we are real military families living in a diverse experience. So it's not aligning, and I don't know who they're gonna fool. We're smarter
Yeah.
than that. Our children
Well,
are
they're not because we're here. We're here doing this. So, you guys, if anything, hopefully this bolsters your your heat on it. I don't know. Can you guys tell I'm turning red because I'm like, it's a million degrees here, and also I have to turn my AC off when we do this. But yes, I hope you guys are just as hot as we are about this topic. Speaking of, um, specific books that are being challenged, we have the most amazing opportunity to share with you guys Charlotte Wild, who's actually here with us, but we pre-recorded a conversation or, some words from Charlotte that I want to share with you guys about her experience in the case we were just referencing, the Mahmoud versus Taylor. She is actually listed as one of the books being called out and banned. So I want to share some of her perspective with you all now.
Hi, my name is Charlotte Sullivan Wild, and I am the spouse of an active duty military chaplain, and I'm also a picture book author. And my picture book, Love Violet, which is about an innocent crush between two girls, something inspired by my own very young childhood, has been censored many times. And in particular, this year, it was involved in a Supreme Court case called Mahmoud versus Taylor about whether religious parents can opt out their children from any exposure to LGBTQ characters in storybooks. And so the idea is to basically erase us completely. And what's hard about that is that that's how I grew up. I grew up in a very religious, very loving home, but I wasn't allowed to know that people like me existed. And it did so much damage to me. And it also made me a worse friend to the people in my life who I discovered later were LGBTQ. And when I did, I just didn't know how to respond. I didn't know because I'd only heard that LGBTQ people were awful and evil and dangerous and villains, and they chose it, and all of this misinformation. So now, my book has been misrepresented in the same way. And that is a core characteristic of censorship, is that people will say all kinds of untrue and misrepresentative things about our books. And it's hard because for most of us creators, our books are coming from a really personal place. Most of us are writing the books that we needed as children and that we didn't have. And the other thing that happened with this case was that a lot of us received hate messages, some of it really ugly, very untrue. One of my colleagues received so much hate messaging, especially every time certain conservative news sources covered her book, that she got death threats and had to involve the FBI. And I just say that not to discourage you, but just as a reminder that while this movement to ban books might pretend to be about protecting children, it's really coming from this culture that is trying to erase people. And I think as military members, that's something that hits really close to home. We've made so many sacrifices. Our family members have given up so much to do this service. And a lot of times, if our families are of color, if we are immigrant, if we are of minority religions or LGBTQ or female, we have already had to push through a lot of resistance, a lot of inequity just to survive in the military and to even be recognized. And in my own family, I've seen this happen with my spouse, who in the 90s as an officer didn't receive the same pay and benefits as men doing the exact same job. And then when she realized she was LGBTQ, again, the same thing happened. Our family wasn't recognized, so her pay was lower. I didn't have access to benefits. And there were so many challenges of having to hide our family until finally the marriage laws changed. And then we were able to go active duty really late in life. And so to now have LGBTQ people under attack after working so hard for this, it's really hard to watch. And the other piece of this is, like, as an author and a former educator, we have also fought really hard to get to the point where these books are even being made. It took 10 years for Love Violet to come into the world. And a good part of that was people were so terrified about a story that portrayed LGBTQ children, even though we exist. And so now is not the time to erase us after we finally are getting these stories. But I have to tell you that the banning is really hitting authors and illustrators hard. A lot of people are losing their speaking income and their school visit income, and the banning is affecting publishing. So, for example, I have a picture book I've been working on about a family that's learning to connect and cope with a deployment. And I had decided to make the family LGBTQ because that was the most relatable for me. And now I'm starting to get rejections about in the last year that they won't take a topic because of the identity of the characters. And so things are closing down for some of us with certain stories. And it's really, and now that, of course, we have the new administration, I don't think that book's going to get published for a long time. And so that's kind of a hidden consequence to all of this book banning. But more important than, my career and all of that is the fact that children need these stories. They deserve to have the stories about their lives that are going to help them cope with life, help them learn how to interact with their peers in a really open and empathetic way. And so, all of this to say, I know as a military member how invaluable our military schools and libraries are. And especially when we're overseas, when we're moving so often, they're often our lifeline. We depend on them. And so we really have to fight for this liberty in this setting. And I just want to leave you with the thought that, in spite of how horrible this time is, the one thing it has really reminded me of is how essential these stories are. I know what they meant to me when I finally found stories that represented my life or that helped me to understand people around me. But I think as we do this work, we have to remember the harms, but also the benefits. Let's remember what we're fighting for and what we're advocating for. And any chance you get to talk about why stories and education matter to you and your family, do that. Lean into the positive value of what we are advocating for. A country where we can all get along, where everybody belongs. That's what we're doing. So thank you for your work. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And if you would like to learn more about Love Violet or the SCOTUS case, you can visit my website. I have lots of videos about the book and a story time for children, and many articles that I've written or shared about Mahmoud versus Taylor. Thank you again for your amazing work.
Charlotte, I know you're on the call. I want to thank you for ending it at such a high point and giving us hope. It is so easy to fall into despair and frustration these days. And Charlotte, just the sound of your voice and your message really did fill me with hope. And I truly hope that everyone on the call feels that way. Again, our desire for this community is to bring military families together and to fight book banning together. We are going to put the survey in the comments one more time. And while you do the survey, we also want to encourage you to join Military Families for Free Expressions. This is how you're going to get updates. You'll be able to volunteer with us. You can even host an event. Libby is going to be putting the sign up in the chat. And also, like, we have a Facebook group, we have an Instagram. I love our Instagram. We're going to be adding those links in the chat as well. Follow us so you can stay up to date, okay? Another really important call to action here is that we want you guys to call your leaders locally and in DC, okay? And even you guys, even your base leaders, including overseas. And if you need help figuring out who your elected officials are, we're going to be putting a link in the chat as well. I know there's a lot of links coming your way, but it's all good and important stuff. And we want to leave you guys feeling charged up and empowered with all this information. Another thing we want to highlight is our Operation Uncensor My Summer. Don't just join a reading challenge, but challenge the system. This is how we're sticking it to the man this summer. And our very own Summer actually created the Red, White, and Ban Book Club. If you are in the Hampton Road area, Summer's kicking off her book club on August 28th at 6:30 p.m. We're putting more information in the chat. And I believe information can be found on our Substack and our Instagram as well. Again, if you're in the Hampton Road area, and if you didn't get all that information, just DM us and we'll be able to send out the information for that event. But we also want to encourage you guys to create your own groups, to create your own community, your own banned book club in your area, local. Just like Philomena said, it all happens locally. Grassroots organizations are the most powerful tool, in my opinion, during times like these. There's also, yep, we're adding that link. Okay. Um, Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for listening. This was such an empowering and educational meeting tonight. And again, our first of many. There will be more of these military families for free expression meets and virtual events where we're chatting. Stay up to date, follow us, and please do not forget how powerful your voice is. Like Philomena said, lift up your voices again and again. And don't forget the beauty of storytelling and what we're fighting for. We're fighting so that the narratives don't get controlled and that everybody, every child sees themselves represented in the pages of books. We want to thank you guys so much for coming out tonight, and we hope to see you again in our next event. Thank you guys so much. Have a lovely evening.